What up, YouTube? Here with a post-fight video of the Canelo Alvarez versus Edgar Berlanga fight. Now, I know this fight has happened over a month ago, and I'm a little late on my review video for this fight. But nonetheless, let me get to the post-fight thought part of the video. Before I give y'all the summary of what happened in the fight, I'm going to tell y'all the results. First, Canelo Alvarez was successful in defense of his unified super middleweight titles. He is no longer the IBF super middleweight champion due to the fact that him and his camp decided to fight Berlanga instead of William Skull, who was the #1 ranked contender according to the IBF super middleweight rankings. Hence why this past July, Saul Alvarez was forced to vacate his IBF super middleweight title for his decision to take on Berlanga instead of Skull. And that was more of a financial business move on the part of Canelo Alvarez and his team, because Berlanga is more of a draw than William Skull is, and William Skull is less experienced. They're similar when it comes to their experience at a professional level, that is, and notoriety-wise, Berlanga is more known in the public world, because if you're a avid boxing fan, you'll know who William Skull is just as much as you'll know who Edgar Berlanga is. And Saul Alvarez, with the level that he's been at, because he's been a staple name in boxing, the most famous name in boxing ever since Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao retired. That's why if Alvarez would have decided to hold to his IBF super middleweight title and take on the mandatory challenger that the IBF had lined up for him, and would have accepted that request from the IBF, then he would have still kept the IBF title and fought William Skull instead. And Saul Alvarez could have did that, and it wouldn't have hurt his career, because Alvarez has fought opponents that doesn't have a lot of notoriety like a William Skull. And the numbers for ticket sales and pay-per-view buys wouldn't have been as successful as if he was to fight Berlanga, which he did last month. But it wouldn't have hurt Alvarez's career, because it's already illustrious. And that's why I say it was more of a political money move for Alvarez and his team to decide to fight Berlanga instead of William Skull. And Berlanga is less of a draw than Jaime Munguia, who was Saul Alvarez's last opponent before defeating Berlanga last month to successfully defend his unified super middleweight titles. And when he fought Jaime Munguia, and with the history that Canelo has with Golden Boy and its promoter Oscar De La Hoya, that was much of a surprise move, because Canelo Alvarez, he had just recently left the zone and started working with PBC again after leaving PBC after his contract expired to work with the zone. And when he fought a PBC exclusive fighter in Jermell Charlo, and that fight wasn't the best of choice for Canelo Alvarez, when he made a not so intriguing bout versus Jermell Charlo, who he fought last before fighting Jaime Munguia, and that fight with Munguia made much more sense than the fight against Jermell Charlo, regardless of the fact that at that specific time being, Jermell Charlo was the undisputed super welterweight champion and had a heck of a resume and was regarded as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters that was currently active at the time. But because of the weight difference, Canelo Alvarez had a huge advantage when fighting Jermell Charlo, because Jermell Charlo has never fought above that 154-pound weight limit. And then Jamie Munguia, on record, he has a lot of experience, but fighting at the level that Canelo Alvarez has been fighting at, he's inexperienced when it comes to big stage fights. And we saw Canelo Alvarez make easy work out of Jaime Munguia when they fought this past May. And the same goes for Berlanga. And unlike Munguia, Berlanga doesn't have as much experience on a professional level, nor did he have the same amount of accomplishment as Munguia when stepping in there with Saul Alvarez last month. And he is lesser known and lesser supported than Jamie Munguia is. Munguia has been building up a lot of hype while he was undefeated prior to stepping in there versus Saul Alvarez this past May. And Berlanga, when he defeated McRory, that's when he left Top Rank. He was fighting at more on the undercards when he was being promoted by Top Rank, and he was building his ranks there. But Edgar Berlanga wasn't being promoted and having the same spotlight as top-ranked prospect fighters that have been getting a lot of notoriety, such as Keyshawn Davis, Bruce Carrington, Jared Anderson, names like that, that Top Rank has made a priority out of those prospects. And while Berlanga was there, he wasn't being shunned the same spotlight as those guys that I have mentioned. And when he fought McRory, that was his first headliner after leaving Top Rank to go with Matchroom and The Zone. Hence why this bout for Canelo Alvarez wasn't a hard bout to make happen after signing with PBC and fighting a PBC exclusive fighter in Jermell Charlo. Then in his next bout, he'll go on to work with Golden Boy and The Zone instead of making it a all in-house PBC show like he did when he fought Jermell Charlo. And he went to co-promote a event with Golden Boy, who he's got bad blood with, and work with The Zone, who he left that network for PBC and Amazon Prime, and then he made it a co-venture promoted bout for his fight with Munguia, as he did with Berlanga as well, because this fight was promoted by Canelo Alvarez's promotion along with The Zone, Matchroom, and PBC. That's why when Canelo Alvarez fought Jermell Charlo, we thought that we were going to get that bout with Alvarez and Benavidez when Benavidez was competing as super middleweight, and Benavidez was the interim WBC super middleweight champion that made him the mandatory challenger next in line to challenge Saul Alvarez when Alvarez had all the belts as super middleweight. And to be honest, I've been saying this for a while. I know I got carried away before I give y'all a summary of what took place in the fight, talking about the relevant current scene at the super middleweight division. And I've been saying this for a while now, that the only fight Saul Alvarez has left in his career is a fight versus David Benavidez, and then he could retire comfortably without any controversial questions in the air, like Canelo Alvarez didn't fight this guy before he retired, because if Canelo Alvarez was hanging the boots up right now, he'll still go down as one of the all-time greats. And I'm still sticking with this statement that the only fight Alvarez has left in his career is that fight versus Benavidez. Then he would have fought all the worthy opponents that fans can say, hey, Canelo has fought everybody but David Benavidez. And until he makes that fight happen versus Benavidez, I can say that will still be the only fight that Canelo Alvarez want to fight, to leave all questions out of the atmosphere when he retires. And for Canelo Alvarez, I don't know what his contract situation is looking like. I don't know after his fight versus Berlanga. Now, I don't know if that was his last fight remaining in his contract when working with PBC, because we know that David Benavidez has been a exclusive PBC fighter for as long as I can remember. Hence why it would have been an easy fight for PBC and Alvarez to make happen if Alvarez in this camp would have decided to go with fighting Benavidez instead of Munguia, Charlo, and Berlanga, who Canelo Alvarez and PBC had to reach out to other promotions and networks to make this fight happen. Not saying his fight versus Munguia and Berlanga wasn't a worthy fight, because it was a challenge where it could have been easily predicted for Alvarez to win those fights, which he did. And he won this fight versus Berlanga in a very one-sided decision win. I personally had this fight score 118 to 109, 10 rounds to 2, including a third-round knockdown for Canelo Alvarez. And Canelo Alvarez, he landed a stiff jab followed by a left hook that dropped Edgar Berlanga for a knockdown. And Berlanga wasn't badly damaged and affected by that knockdown. It lit a fire under Berlanga's butt, to sort of say, for Berlanga to get excited for the remaining of the bout. And that didn't help Berlanga out at all, because Canelo Alvarez was on cruise control, where Alvarez easily dominated his way to a victory versus Berlanga. The only rounds where I had scored in favor of Berlanga was the 1st and the 11th round. And in the 10th round, there was a controversial moment where Canelo Alvarez took his foot off the gas pedal and turned his back on Berlanga, which was a mistake on Canelo's part that most fans don't expect out of not only a elite level fighter like a Canelo Alvarez, but a experienced fighter overall, or any professional, that is, to never have one's guard down and turn its back on its opponent, which Canelo did at the end of the 10th round. And then Berlanga took advantage of that and came at him with a lead hook that landed flush on Canelo. And Canelo was frustrated by that, and they had a heated moment of exchanging taunts to each other. And then after that, the 11th round, Berlanga turned up the heat on Canelo. Canelo reacted well to the onslaught that Berlanga brought onto him. I see more out of desperation on the part of Berlanga, because Berlanga in his corner knew that Berlanga was down on the scorecards and Canelo Alvarez was winning the fight. Hence why Berlanga turned it up on Canelo. But as experienced and as well reserved Canelo is, who has solidified and has worked very efficiently on his defensive game. Canelo Alvarez has, throughout the latter parts of his career, improved on his head movement and upper body movement and his footwork and his ring generalship, where Alvarez does a good job at avoiding his punches, his opponent's punches, with either a high guard block that makes it very difficult for his opponents to penetrate their shots against Canelo, as well as Canelo's slick defensive game with his head and upper body movement and his slip game, where his opponents tend to miss a lot of the shots that they throw towards Canelo. And Canelo Alvarez, his best onslaught and his best offense that worked for him throughout the entire course of the fight was his jab along with his lead hook, and those shots were landing flush for Canelo. Canelo was very accurate with those shots, and he tends to do very well when it comes to throwing those specific punches out there. And Canelo's very methodical with his shot placements, and Canelo Alvarez was working those shots, that left hook along with his jab, very fluidly, very successfully, and very accurately and very consistently throughout the entirety of the fight. And as well as his ring generalship skills was also displayed throughout majority of the fight, and he was doing a good job at closing the distance versus Berlanga and pressuring Berlanga towards the corner and the ropes. And whenever he would have Berlanga stuck at a specific spot in the ring, Canelo did a efficient job, as experienced as he is, at going to work and entrapping Berlanga and doing efficient work, while having Berlanga trapped at certain spots in the ring and cutting off the ring and closing that gap and landing his shots effectively and consistently throughout the entirety of the fight. And Canelo Alvarez pretty much fought a perfect fight versus Berlanga, where it made it look like it was easy work for Canelo Alvarez. Just another day at the office, to sort of say. That is a old saying that is used in many different operatives. And it was another day at work for Canelo Alvarez. And it still goes to show that Berlanga is quite green. Shout to Berlanga for a much-gained effort and a never-die attitude on the part of Berlanga when he fought Canelo Alvarez. And Canelo Alvarez, he is the majority unified super middleweight champion still. And as I said, I'm still going to push for Canelo Alvarez's last fight to be versus David Benavidez, who now fights at light heavyweight and is the current interim WBC light heavyweight champion. He is scheduled to fight David Morrell, who's the current regular WBA light heavyweight champion, who, much like Benavidez in his most recent bout, stepped up to light heavyweight after competing at super middleweight for a while. And both Benavidez and Morrell were high-ranked contenders at super middleweight when they were both competing at super middleweight. And that fight would be a fight between two undefeated fighters that are high profiles at both super middleweight and at light heavyweight. And they've only both had one fight each at light heavyweight, and it was both their most recent bouts. And they had better performances before their debut fight at light heavyweight. Hence why a lot of fans are saying that they would much rather see Benavidez versus Morrell at super middleweight than at light heavyweight, which they are scheduled to fight at, I believe, December of this year on the co-main event of Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach. And that fight was recently announced to be scheduled for December of this year. And that is like what they did this past summer when Davis fought Frank Martin for the lightweight title. We saw Benavidez on the co-feature bout in his debut fight at light heavyweight versus Gazdi, and Morrell, he defeated Kalazic, and whoever wins that fight can be next in line to challenge the new undisputed light heavyweight champion, Arthur Beterbiev. And currently, how the light heavyweight division is looking, Beterbiev can either rematch Bivol, who he defeated this past Saturday, in what many people say was a controversial lucky decision win for Beterbiev, because a lot of people do believe that Bivol outboxed Beterbiev in their bout. And it was a close competitive bout. And I'm going to give y'all my post-fight video on that fight later on whenever I find the time to. And Saul Alvarez, he's been talked about of stepping back up to light heavyweight, and Canelo Alvarez has only fought twice at light heavyweight, once where he was successful in capturing the WBC light heavyweight title when he knocked out Sergey Kovalev to win his debut fight at light heavyweight. And in his second bout at light heavyweight, he came up short versus Dmitry Bivol in a decision loss. And he's been talked about as far as a lot of boxing fans and their interest in wanting to see Canelo Alvarez challenge Arthur Beterbiev for Beterbiev's light heavyweight title. Now, Canelo Alvarez hasn't talked a lot about wanting to fight Beterbiev and wanting to move back up to light heavyweight to reattempt to capture his second title at light heavyweight. And now that Benavidez is fighting at light heavyweight, and me wanting to say I want Canelo to fight Benavidez before he retires, because that's the only fight, in my opinion, that Canelo Alvarez has left in his legendary career to take on. And if Canelo Alvarez wants to fight Benavidez, now Benavidez has been wanting to fight Canelo Alvarez for the longest time, because Benavidez, being a former super middleweight champion and he is still undefeated, he had to vacate that title due to testing positive for a drug that isn't performance enhancement related. And I know he wanted to get his title back that he never lost. And because that title that he was vacated of was a title which he never lost, he's more eager than ever to want to fight for that title that he never lost. So I'm quite sure that Benavidez won't have a problem of stepping back down to super middleweight to gain the titles that he never lost. And I don't see why Alvarez and his team didn't make that fight versus Benavidez happen when Benavidez is a PBC promoted fighter and Canelo Alvarez decided to jump ship from working with the Zone to PBC, and that would have been a all in-house PBC fight instead of Canelo Alvarez's last two fights versus Munguia and Berlanga. And I don't know how Canelo Alvarez's contract is looking as far as networks go. If Canelo Alvarez still has a fight left with the Zone, well, not the Zone, I mean PBC, then I can say make it a all-exclusive PBC bout where Canelo Alvarez takes on Benavidez, dependent. Well, I wouldn't even say it's necessary for Benavidez to defeat David Morrell in his next bout. It'd be a better look for momentum's sake for Benavidez to defeat David Morrell to have that fight versus Canelo Alvarez, which is the fight that Benavidez has been chasing for a long time and is the hottest bout for the super middleweight division to make happen right now. And then there's the current number one ranked WBC contender at super middleweight, Christian Billy, who is undefeated but is lesser known than David Benavidez and Jaime Munguia and Caleb Plant, and I can say he is on the same notoriety level as a Edgar Berlanga or a David Morrell, who isn't headliner level of a fighter yet. Christian Billy, he can headline his own bouts where he fights exclusively out there in Quebec, Canada. Christian Billy is a African-born fighter that fought in France during his amateur career, then moved to Canada to turn professional, and he's been building quite the hype where he currently lives at in the province of Quebec, Canada, and he's been building a local buzz out there, and he is promoted by Top Rank, and he is the number one ranked contender according to the super middleweight rankings within the WBC organization, and he isn't that well known when it comes to the American market or the public sports fans. So that fight won't be as marketably intriguing, and the promotion companies won't be able to capitalize as much as if Alvarez was to fight Benavidez or a Morrell or a Jermall Charlo, who's been out of action for a while and inconsistent, and Charlo recently made his return to being active as a fighter after not competing for over 2 years for personal reasons. And in his return, he showed that he didn't have a lot of ring rust, but it wasn't the best fight available for him, and it was his debut fight at super middleweight, and that was at the fall of last year. And we've seen better from Charlo before, and Charlo, he had to vacate his WBC middleweight title because he's been out of action for over 2 years, and now that he stepped up to super middleweight, he is a marketable name, but because of his hiatus, there is other worthy opponents that are more deserving of a fight versus the cash cow of the sport in Canelo Alvarez. And I say if Benavidez defeats Morrell, or if Morrell defeats Benavidez, they could be next in line to challenge Canelo Alvarez for his unified super middleweight titles. And I'm quite sure even Morrell or Benavidez won't have a problem moving back down to super middleweight to make that fight happen versus Saul Alvarez. And as far as Berlanga goes, he could fight Munguia, Caleb Plant, and Caleb Plant, who was also featured on the undercard to Alvarez versus, I was going to say Munguia, but Berlanga And speaking of Berlanga, he had a run-in, a face-off with Caleb Plant leading to this fight, and Plant being featured on the undercard to Canelo versus Berlanga, and Plant was successful in his fight versus Trevor McCumbee, where he defeated McCumbee via ninth round TKO. And Caleb Plant, after losing to David Benavidez and losing to Saul Alvarez, and Caleb Plant, he's still regarded as one of the elite fighters at super middleweight, and for Berlanga to fight Plant, who was featured on the undercard to his fight versus Alvarez, it could be a good step up fight for Berlanga after Berlanga stepped up in competition to fighting the biggest draw in the sport in Saul Alvarez. And that would be another good experience for Berlanga to have versus Caleb Plant. And if Berlanga can't fight Plant, who is promoted by PBC, and Berlanga is with the Zone, then another good fight for Berlanga would be versus Jaime Munguia, who exclusively fights on the Zone and is promoted by Golden Boy. And with Berlanga being a Matchroom promotion promoted fighter and exclusively fighting on the Zone as well, that would be an easy all in-house fight to make happen for the Zone, Golden Boy, and Matchroom. Berlanga versus Munguia after their recent bouts versus Alvarez would be a good fight to make happen. And speaking of Munguia, Munguia was successful in his last fight after his first defeat that he suffered versus Alvarez, and he defeated Eric Bazinian in the 10th round via TKO to successfully bounce back from his defeat versus Alvarez. And I believe that fight was aired on ESPN because Eric Bazinian is promoted by Top Rank. Now, I don't know what the promotional side of things is looking like for Munguia. I don't know if Munguia jumped ship from working with Golden Boy to work with Top Rank and ESPN. But nonetheless, either Berlanga versus Munguia or Berlanga versus Plant would be a good fight for the super middleweight division. And anyways, that does it for this post-fight video of the Saul Alvarez versus Edgar Berlanga fight. Now, if y'all enjoyed this video, hit the like button, click the share button, and to show y'all support for this channel, y'all could subscribe to this channel for more content. And y'all could follow me on other social media platforms with the links in the description. And as well as y'all could donate to this channel to show y'all support for this channel as well. Anything will be appreciated. And yeah, that does it for this video, y'all. Be good and peace.